They clapped for everyone but me, so I turned around and never came back. He stood alone under the dim streetlight outside Chicago's Civic Center Hall and heard the final applause for someone else I never imagined would fail me. It was the night I should have celebrated a lifetime achievement, but instead I was left in silence and shadows. Every face in that auditorium turned away and applauded my colleagues while I fled through the back entrance with tears burning my throat and the echo of empty seats searing through my heart. I felt the weight of every unspoken word and every broken promise crashing around me as I stumbled into the alleyway behind Pennsylvania Station. I had arrived in Chicago 2 years earlier with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and a worn notebook filled with clarinet solos and hopeful notes. My name is Evelyn Harper, and before that night I believed I belonged on that stage. I had spent countless mornings practicing at dawn near Lake Michigan, braving the winter wind that sliced through my coat, and countless evenings convincing skeptical sponsors in downtown lofts in search of funding for my concert series. Every rejection letter fueled my determination until the day I received the invitation to perform at the Civic Center Hall. It was the moment I had been chasing since college recitals at UCLA, where professors told me I had something special. I thought my colleagues were allies until the day they invited me to that final rehearsal in a loft near Wrigleyville. Everyone smiled and nodded, but I noticed the glances exchanged when I left the room. They whispered behind my back about my technique and questioned my emotional range. I tried to laugh it off, but every joke felt like a knife twisting in my spine. I confided in Marcus, my longtime friend and violinist who shared my passion and ambition. He promised to stand by me, but something changed in his eyes the day before the big event. I woke that morning to an email with the subject line urgent, and my heart sank when I saw the team's schedule had been rearranged without my name beside the solo. It felt deliberate and cruel. I considered confronting Marcus or even walking away from the entire production, but years of hard work and sacrifice made me refuse to give up. As I stepped into my small apartment near the River North District, I played that message again to steel myself. I dressed in my performance gown and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The sequined bodice felt tight against my chest, reminding me that every inch of that fabric was woven with my dreams. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Marcus asking him to meet me outside the hall at 8:45. My heartbeat thundered as I rehearsed the confrontation in my mind, but I promised myself I would not leave without an explanation. The night air was cool when I stepped onto Michigan Avenue and walked toward the grand stone columns of the Civic Center Hall lit by amber lamplight. I checked my watch and saw 8:50. Marcus was late. I pressed my back against the cold pillar and waited. My pulse rattled in my ears. At 9 o'clock the last guests filtered in and the security guard locked the doors. Panic surged when I realized that tonight was my debut, and if I missed it I would be erased from the program entirely. I scanned the dimly lit plaza hoping to spot his familiar silhouette, but found only strangers hurrying toward the entrance. I hesitated. Fear clashed with determination as I imagined the faces inside waiting for me to grace the stage. My clarinet rested in its case, but my hands trembled too much to hold it. I thought back to my mother in Los Angeles, who always told me that opportunity favors the bold, and my grandmother in Seattle, who believed I could change the world with music. I swallowed my dread and took a step forward, only to feel a sharp tug on my sleeve. It was Marcus. His eyes were dark with regret or something else I could not name. Before I could speak, he pulled me away from the entrance into the side alley. He pressed me against the damn brick wall and whispered that I was in danger and the show was a trap. My heart pounded as his words sank in. A trap. The same stage where I clapped for everyone else had been rigged to humiliate me in front of the entire board and press. I demanded answers, but his face twisted with guilt. He admitted they had been persuaded by a rival sponsor from New York who offered far more funding if she replaced me with a star soprano. I shook my head in disbelief, and his breath hitched as he begged forgiveness. Tears welled in my eyes, but I fought them down and stepped back, furious beyond words. I realized in that moment that I had a choice: to fight for my place or to walk away. The rain began to fall and the alley lamps cast flickering shadows. Marcus reached out, but I turned away without a glance. I stepped into the street and walked north toward the river, determined to rewrite my own story and never return to a place that clapped for everyone but me. I walked away from the Civic Center hall soaked by the rain and shivering with more than cold. The street lamps reflected diamonds on the wet pavement as I hurried past empty storefronts and shuttered restaurants. Every step felt like shedding a layer of who I thought I was. I realized I no longer wanted applause from strangers whose respect could vanish in a heartbeat. The clarinet case felt heavier than ever, but inside I carried something more precious: determination forged by betrayal. I decided to reclaim my music on my own terms. I found a small cafe on West Jackson Street where the owner welcomed live music. I sat at a wooden table covered in coffee stains, eyes scanning a flyer for open mic night. I dialed Professor Williams's number. He had taught me composition at UCLA and now directed a community arts center in Fremont, Seattle. His voice crackled with surprise and warmth when I explained my situation. He offered me a residency and a chance to headline an autumn concert series if I could arrive within 2 weeks. Hope flickered in my chest at the prospect of a fresh start. I spent the next morning packing my life into the suitcase that had crossed state lines more than once. Every garment reminded me of late nights practicing in empty halls and phone calls begging for sponsorship. I emailed a farewell note to the cafe owner and left a recording of my composition as thanks. Then I boarded the Amtrak train northbound, its engines humming hope beneath the platform. I watched the city skyline recede behind me, turn of the wheel echoing my heartbeat. The journey would last 28 hours, giving me time to rewrite every page of my ambition. When I arrived in Seattle, the air smelled of pine and rain-soaked sidewalks. Professor Williams greeted me at the station with a thermos of tea and a smile. He led me through winding streets to the community center, a brick building alive with street art, laughter. Inside, I met fellow musicians and storytellers from every background. They welcomed me without reservation, offering encouragement I had not felt in years. That evening I performed an impromptu piece in the center's auditorium. My clarinet soared over wooden chairs and flickering bulbs. For the first time since Chicago, I felt truly seen. During the residency, I poured everything into a new suite of pieces inspired by the Pacific Northwest. I practiced under fir trees at sunrise and late in the center's rehearsal room until dusk. Fellow artists commented on the raw emotion in my melodies and urged me to share them at a benefit concert. The featured soprano would be Serena Vale, a talent from New York. I felt unease when I learned she was connected to the sponsor who had replaced me in Chicago. Doubt crept in, but I accepted the invitation to prove my art's resilience. I felt pure resolve. Rehearsals began in the echoing hall. Serena and I sat side by side on a wooden bench, our music stands angled together. I saw her study my solo parts with intensity, her eyes lingering over each measure. One afternoon, I returned from a break to find my sheets soaked in water. Panic seized me as I separated the pages. Serena came over, concerned, then handed me a replacement. I recognized her handwriting in the notes. I realized nobody else noticed the silent switch. Her betrayal was precise. My heart clenched, but I met her gaze and refused to show fear. Concert day arrived under a gray sky. The community center filled with hopeful faces and candles. Serena and I warmed up backstage, my clarinet drying in my hands. I detected her sigh as she tuned her soprano aria. My chest tightened when the lights dimmed. I stepped onto the stage and breathed before my solo entrance. Midway through the movement, a power surge plunged the hall into darkness. A murmur rose from the audience. I froze, but then I remembered my morning practice under open sky. I lifted my instrument to my lips and played without waiting for flickering lights. When the lights returned, the hall burst into applause that shook my ribs. I heard the next movement over the rush of relief and triumph. Serena stumbled from the wings, her face pale as winter fog. She confessed she could not continue, hit performance panic. The sponsor from New York rose from the row, her expression unreadable. I held my clarinet against my chest and offered to perform the vocal solo in my arrangement. The crowd fell silent. I inhaled and began to play and sing, blending voice and clarinet in a breath. Their applause rose again, genuine and loud. After the performance, I descended the side staircase to find the sponsor waiting at the bottom. Her coat dripped with raindrops from the storm outside. She studied me for a moment in silence, then extended her hand. She praised my courage and offered me recording contract on her label along with a national tour with Serena Vale. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, but the ache in my fingers and the warmth in my chest made me hesitate. I glanced back toward the stage where empty seats glowed under lights. I raised my eyes and prepared my reply. I held out my hand, feeling the weight of the sponsor's gaze and the warmth of the stage lights that still lingered in my vision. She smiled, her eyes sharp as broken glass and her voice soft as rain tapping on windows. She offered me recorded sessions in New York, a contract with clauses loaded with golden promises, worldwide distribution, a headline slot at Lincoln Center, her label's full backing. I remembered Chicago's betrayal, Serena's silent sabotage, the way applause can turn hollow. I hesitated, my heart caught between hunger for recognition and fear of another trap. My fingers desired to play, my mind demanded caution. The clarinet case at my feet felt both anchor and albatross. I knew I needed a choice that honored my music and my soul. I exhaled slowly, inhaled deeply, and prepared to negotiate terms that would define my future. The sponsor's expression shifted as I presented my conditions. I demanded creative control over my recordings, the right to publish my compositions without alteration, and equal billing with Serena Vale on promotional materials. I insisted on a clause forbidding any unilateral changes to the set list and guaranteed support for a charity concert benefiting music education. Her lips curved into a calculating grin, and she tilted her head, considering my words. She countered with modifications that trimmed my control and shifted financial burdens onto me, claiming industry standards. My pulse quickened as I read between her lines. This was another test. I recalled the freezing alley in Chicago and the drenched clarinet reeds. I pressed on, refusing intimidation. The room hummed with tension while I waited for her to yield. Finally, she drew a breath, nodded subtly, and signaled her legal team to draft the revisions. With the revised contract in hand, I signed the page that bound me to her label under my rules. The pen felt smooth as I traced my name, and the signatures of her representatives glowed like seals of fate. In that moment, I believed I had secured the power to shape my destiny, to forge an authentic career on terms that respected my artistry. I folded the papers and slipped them into the inner pocket of my coat. The sponsor extended her arm again, this time in sincere congratulations, and I accepted her handshake without regret. I left the community center's lobby with a mixture of triumph and caution swirling in my chest. Serena watched from the staircase, her eyes reflecting admiration tinged with envy. I acknowledged her quietly with a nod and walked past her into the rain. The night was cold, but my resolve burned warmly beneath my collar. The first tour date arrived in Minneapolis under slate-gray skies that threatened snow in early autumn. A tour bus idled outside the concert hall while crew members unloaded equipment in hurried choreography. I climbed the narrow steps and found my bunk between the guitars and the amps. The clarinet case was my only companion through winding highways and dimly lit rest stops. I practiced scales quietly before dawn, the hum of diesel engines lulling me into fierce concentration. At night, I joined Serena and the guitarist for late dinners at diners where neon lights flickered. We shared stories about childhood dreams and the hunger that drove us. Despite past conflicts, we discovered mutual respect, forged by the trials of performance. Each applause at every city felt genuine, resonating deeper than any stadium could offer. When we performed in New Orleans, I stepped onto the stage bathed in warm amber lights. The audience's voices rose in greeting like an ocean's tide, a wave of sound carrying me across the boards. Serena's soprano joined my clarinet in seamless harmony until the final note lingered and broke into thunderous approval. I looked out at rows of faces, each person moved by melody and emotion, and I felt a gratitude stronger than vindication. Backstage, my sponsor watched with cool detachment, her smile no longer sharp. She had lost the edge that threatened me in Chicago. I realized I had reclaimed my narrative, one note at a time. In between cities, I explored jazz clubs off the beaten path and wrote essays on the fleeting magic of live music. My journal filled with reflections on trust, ambition, and the price of creative freedom. Now, As I sit in my hotel room in New York after the final concert at Lincoln Center, I savor the quiet hum of afterglow. The city outside bustles with ambition, but inside these walls I treasure the silence that cradles my thoughts. The contract sits on the desk, signed and sealed, yet it feels less binding now that I have proven my worth on my own terms. I trace the curves of the clarinet's keys and recall every betrayal and every triumph that brought me here. I draft plans for a small foundation to support overlooked musicians, ensuring no one endures the isolation I once knew. Tomorrow I will meet professors and patrons to discuss upcoming projects. Tonight I will sleep with gratitude, comforted by the knowledge that I walked away from empty applause and never looked back. This journey has taught me that true recognition is born from authenticity and courage. I look ahead to the horizon of this new chapter with humility. Music remains my compass, guiding me through uncertainty and firmly anchoring me to truth. Whenever doubt arises, I will remember the night I walked away from Chicago and the nights I reclaimed applause with every genuine note. My story is now composed in my own voice, and I intend to write every movement with courage.